The New York Times released an article. They published an article about a U.S. war crime in Syria. Now, this took place a couple of years ago, but we're only just finding out about it now, or at least the Western press is only admitting to it now. The title reads, "A dam in Syria was on a no-strike list. The United States bombed it anyway." So, I'm just going to read a few passages from it to give you background information. They say, near the height of the war against the Islamic State in Syria, a sudden riot of explosions rocked the country's largest dam, a towering 18-story structure on the Euphrates River that held back a 25-mile-long reservoir above a valley where hundreds of thousands of people lived. The Tabqa Dam was a strategic linchpin, and the Islamic State controlled it. The explosions on March 26, 2017, knocked dam workers to the ground, and everything went dark. Witnesses say one bomb punched down 5 floors. A fire spread, and crucial equipment failed. The mighty flow of the Euphrates River suddenly had no way through. The reservoir began to rise, and local authorities used loudspeakers to warn people downstream to flee. The Islamic State, the Syrian government, and Russia blamed the United States, but the dam was on the U.S. military's no-strike list of protected civilian sites, and the commander of the U.S. offensive at the time, then Lieutenant General Stephen Townsend, said allegations of U.S. involvement were based on crazy reporting. The Tabqa Dam is not a coalition target, he declared emphatically 2 days after the blasts. In fact, members of a top-secret U.S. Special Operations Unit called Task Force 9, does that ring a bell? Had struck the dam using some of the largest conventional bombs in the U.S. arsenal, including at least one BLU-109 bunker buster bomb, designed to destroy thick concrete structures, according to 2 former senior officials. And they had done it despite a military report warning not to bomb the dam, because the damage could cause a flood that might kill tens of thousands of civilians. So you can see here on the map, Raqqa is here. Raqqa is a city. The clowns in Daesh and ISIS declared that their capital, just to give you an idea of where we are. And this is, of course, in northeastern Syria, right? So the Tabqa Dam is not far. Continuing, given the dam's protected status, the decision to strike it would normally have been made high up the chain of command, but the former officials said the task force used a procedural shortcut reserved for emergencies, allowing it to launch the attack without clearance. Later, 3 workers who had rushed to the dam to prevent a disaster were killed in a different coalition strike, according to dam workers. So let me break down to you what happened. This dam is absolutely crucial infrastructure because, again, as they're saying, if the dam failed, the water would overflow, and all the people who are living down in the valley, their homes would be destroyed, they would drown, it would kill tens of thousands of people. And the United States had officially put it on a no-strike list, right? So things that they are not supposed to strike, not supposed to hit, because they're crucial infrastructure. This Task Force 9, this special unit, does that ring a bell? I talked about Task Force 9, which was mentioned in another New York Times article just a few weeks ago, where they talked about how in Syria, that same unit, Task Force 9, had called in an airstrike and killed 70 Syrian women and children. And they used the same trick to do it, right? So they know that the dam is on a no-strike list. So what do? They say, oh, it's an emergency. We're being overwhelmed. We're facing enemy fire. You have to give us air cover, air support now. And that's the trick they've been using to go to circumvent the chain of command, because as just logically, you have an hierarchy in the army and in the armed forces. If such a target were to be hit, being on a no-strike list, someone very high up would have to take that decision, not in a split second. But they have a mechanism where they can just say, oh, it's self-defense. And then they bombed those 60, 70 Syrian women and children. They just killed them, and they tried to cover it up. They bulldozed the site and covered it up, a mass grave. And they did the same thing here, this task force. The exact same thing. They lied, and they claimed that they were under fire, and that there was an imminent threat. And they asked for one of the biggest bombs. It's not just like any sort of air cover. One of the biggest bombs in the arsenal. The bomb didn't explode. It did go into the dam, It did cause equipment to fail. It almost caused tens of thousands of people to die. But by some miracle, it was a dud, and it didn't explode. When the weapons manufacturers, they make anything from bullets to artillery shells to grenades, there's a dud percentage. There's always a tiny percentage that is not going to work. It just won't explode, and it fails. Usually it's 0 point something percent. And in this case, that was one of the bombs that didn't explode. Just to give you an idea of how serious this strike was and how critical it was, everyone started working together, ironically. Critical equipment lay in ruins and the dam stopped functioning entirely. The reservoir quickly rose 50 feet and nearly spilled over the dam, which engineers said would have been catastrophic. The situation grew so desperate that authorities at dams upstream in Turkey cut water flow into Syria to buy time. And sworn enemies in the years-long conflict, Daesh, the Syrian government, Syrian defense forces, and the United States called a rare emergency ceasefire so civilian engineers could race to avert a disaster. The destruction would have been unimaginable, a former director at the dam said. The number of casualties would have exceeded the number of Syrians who have died throughout the war. So they're talking about the lies, that no one was firing at the Task Force 9. That was all nonsense. So 2 workers were at the dam that day. One of them, an electrical engineer, recalled Daesh fighters positioned in the northern tower as usual that day, but no fighting underway. No fighting underway when they went into the dam to work on the cooling system. Hours later, a shuddering series of booms knocked them to the floor, the room filled with smoke. The engineer found his way out into the sunlight through a normally locked door that had been blown open. He froze when he saw the broad wings of an American B-52 against the clear blue sky. So fearing he would be mistaken for an enemy fighter, the engineer ducked back into the smoldering tower. Engineers in Daesh territory called their former colleagues in the Syrian government, who then contacted allies in the Russian military for help. A few hours after the strike, a special desk phone reserved for directed communications between the US and Russia started ringing in a busy operations center in Qatar. When a coalition officer picked up, a Russian officer on the other end warned US airstrikes had caused serious damage to the dam, and there was no time to waste, according to a coalition official. Less than 24 hours after the strikes, American-backed forces, Russian and Syrian officials, and Daesh coordinated a pause in hostilities. A team of 16 workers, some from the Islamic State, some from the Syrian government, some from the American allies, drove to the site, according to the engineer who was with the group. They worked furiously as the water rose. The distrust and tension were so thick that at points fighters shot into the air. They succeeded in repairing the crane, which eventually allowed the floodgates to open, saving the dam. The US-backed Syrian Democratic Forces dismissed reports of serious damage as propaganda. A spokeswoman said the coalition had struck the dam with only light weapons so as to not cause damage. And then, of course, the general denied it, right? He said that it was on a no-strike list. And then it turns out Task Force 9 didn't even report the strike. So they called it in, claiming self-defense, and then they didn't even report it. No disciplinary action was taken against the task force. The secret unit continued to strike targets using the same type of self-defense justifications it had used on the dam. While the dam was still being repaired, the task force sent a drone over the community next to the dam. As the drone circled, 3 of the civilian workers who had rushed to save the dam finished their work and piled into a small van and headed back toward their homes. More than a mile away from the dam, the van was hit by a coalition airstrike. A mechanical engineer, a technician, and a Syrian Red Crescent worker were killed. The United States almost killed more Syrians than have been killed in the entire war by blowing up a dam, which is a war crime. Hitting civilian infrastructure is a war crime. And then they killed the fucking engineers. They murdered the people who fixed the dam and prevented the disaster in a drone strike. I mean, this makes my blood boil. This makes me so angry. This is absolutely disgusting. This is, what kind of behavior is this? Who does this? Who does this crap? They murdered the people who saved the day, who saved this thing from turning into a disaster. I'm so disgusted. I'm so angry. I really am. And do you see how they deny what happened. So they commit this war crime, bombing a dam, bombing civilian infrastructure. And then because their own units are lying to them, to their chain of command, they then claim that, no, it's not true. We never struck this target. It's a lie. It's propaganda. How many other things do you think they've lied about or they didn't know about? How many other things do you think they're covering up? Ask yourself that. I mean, again, we didn't need the New York Times to tell us these things because people have been talking about this for years. People have been saying this for years. And it's always way later when no one is going to be held accountable for it. It's far too late, and then they start talking about it. And no disciplinary action was taken. You saw that? So this unit has been running wild, and they know it. They know this. If we know this, if the New York Times know this, and you and I are aware of what this unit is doing, you think the chain of command doesn't know this now? They're very aware that this Task Force 9 has been slaughtering civilians, killing Syrian civilians, and covering up mass graves, and bombing public infrastructure, committing war crime after war crime. They even killing the people who saved the dam, and there's no disciplinary action. It's just like the Australians, right? They go around murdering the Australian SAS and the British SAS. They go around murdering people in Afghanistan, executing them. They can't even cover up their crimes properly, and no disciplinary action. No one is convicted of a war crime. Nothing, right? They talk about justice, and they talk about how they only use lethal force when necessary, and it's precision strikes, it's surgical strikes. Bullshit, horse shit, complete fucking bullshit. This is exactly what. How is this different from when they say Bashar al-Assad is bombing hospitals? How many times have you heard, Syria and Russia are bombing hospitals, they're bombing public infrastructure, they're killing civilians? How the fuck is this any different? You keep saying that the Syrian government is like some monstrous organization, and the Russians are monsters because they just indiscriminately bomb civilians. How the fuck is this any different? How does this make you any better? What moral high ground do you have to lecture anyone else? Disgusting. I'm so angry. I'm so furious about this. This is so evil, and like the disrespect, the complete disregard for human life. They just kill people like they're ants, like they're nothing, like they're nothing. How many people do you think they've killed like this? This is, again, it's very similar to what the US did to North Korea. Do you know the United States killed 20% of North Korea's population? I'm saying that again. I'm going to repeat this. The United States killed 20% of North Korea's population in 3 years during the Korea War. 20%. They bombed everything, including dams. They ran out of targets. They had bombed so many things with napalm. They used more bombs. Let me put this into perspective for you. The United States dropped more bombs on North Korea than all the bombs it used against Japan in World War II. They decimated that country, and they bombed all the public infrastructure. They bombed numerous dams, and they flooded and killed people just like they would have here in Syria if that dud had exploded. And then they wonder why North Korea doesn't like the Americans. Jesus Christ, you got some fucking stones. Really. And then they want to make North Korea look like the weird one, like they're evil and all this. Look at what you did to North Korea. Look what you did to those people, to that country. They killed 20% of the population. Jesus Christ. So this is really just, I mean, how would people in the West feel about that? Like if North Korea or Syria was bombing dams and bridges and power stations and generators in the United States. Would you think Americans would like that? So why do they allow their government to do that to other people in their name? Why? I'm pretty sure most people would not agree with that. But where is the resistance? Like where is the effort to stop this? There is none. And the politicians, these politicians, they're all bought. There's no anti-war politicians in the US. There's no anti-war politicians in the UK. It doesn't exist. When it comes to war, they're hand in glove, man. I'm so angry. I'm really angry. I don't know anything about these engineers who were killed. I don't know, rent crescent worker. I don't know what political affiliation they are. I don't know anything about them, and I'm still angered by it because it's so it's such a vile disregard for human life. You know, they just kill them like they're nothing for no reason whatsoever.